We're live, and we are live. We'll just wait for people to join, and then I'll intro you properly to everyone.
Okay, cool.
Welcome. We'll just give it a minute or so for a few more people to join, and then we will kick off. Right, let's make a start. So welcome everyone to today's class. This is the Burns and Admiral puppy parenting classes, and this class is Ask a Vet. And here we have TikTok star and veterinarian Ben the Vet. So Ben is going to be answering some questions that I've pulled together to talk through about bringing a new puppy home and things that you should be aware of. If you have any questions for him, please do just place them in the comments, and we'll either get to them at the end, or if they're relevant to the subject that we're talking about, we can raise them then. So welcome, Ben. Thank you so much for joining us today.
That's okay. Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I guess the first thing I'd like to start talking about is bringing a new puppy home. What does anyone who's getting a new puppy need to be bear in mind when they're choosing a breed?
I mean, there's a huge amount to think about. I think it's quite overwhelming when you're trying to decide on a dog breed. You know, there's hundreds of different pedigree breeds and breed mixes, and of course the good old Mongol you can get. You know, you don't have to get a pedigree dog breed necessarily. So things to think about. I mean, get a dog that suits your family and your lifestyle. What kind of lifestyle do you live now? Do you expect to be living in a year or 5 years, 10 years? Because this dog's going to be part of your life for a long time. So, you know, if you work really long hours, you've got a young family, or if you're elderly and you've got mobility problems, then getting a big energetic dog like a German Shepherd or a collie working breed like a collie, then that might not be the best idea. But then also think about health. So some of the most popular dog breeds at the moment are much more prone to health problems than others, particularly flat-faced breeds like pugs, Frenchies, bulldogs. So it's important to be aware of this, because that might influence your decision making. But if you are set on one of these breeds, then doing your research and knowing what problems they're prone to means that you can talk to the dog's breeder about what kind of health testing they do to reduce the risk of some of those problems. And maybe even think about talking to your vet before you get register, just to talk to them for advice on what dog you know. If you've got a short list of a few breeds, you can ask them what health problems are relevant to that breed, and then that can be really valuable.
Yeah, that's a really good point, to think about the costs that you're going to have over the time of the dog's life. And we have a class on Monday with a breeder to talk through sort of what questions you should be asking breeders. So if that's of interest to anyone, do join that on Monday at lunchtime. So what age can a puppy come home?
So general consensus is around 8 weeks of age, so not before then. And the reason is because it's important that the puppy is with their mum until that sort of age. It's important for their development and for their socialization. So they need to spend enough time with their mum and with their litter mates to learn important skills like grooming, playing, and to just build their general confidence. It's been shown that puppies taken away from their mother too young, significantly before this 8 weeks, are more likely to develop behavioral problems, aggression, anxieties when they grow up. So it is really important. And also a good breeder will spend that time trying to socialize the puppy with obviously the litter mates and the mum, but also, you know, maybe like cats, if they have a cat, children is really important. So they have this socialization window that starts from the age of about 4 weeks up till sort of 12, 14 weeks. Some of that will be with the breeder and some of that will be with you. So, you know, both of you have a role to play in that socialization.
Think And then what should a new puppy owners be aware of when they first bring their puppy home?
So I think, think about taking some time off for a few days at least when you get the puppy, just because it can be quite overwhelming, but also just to enjoy that period, and because it is a really special time when you take home your new family member. there are checklists available online. You can go on websites like the PDSA and they'll have a list of essential items for getting a dog. I'd say as well, another thing to think about would be just plan a list of questions that you have for the breeder. You can even ask them before you collect the puppy or when you go to visit the puppy. What are they feeding the puppy, and what have they exposed the puppy to in terms of socialization? So like I said about cats, you might have a cat. Do they have any cats in the house? Like, that's a good thing to know. Some people like to ask the breeder for a blanket or a toy that smells like the mum, just to help the puppy settle into their new home with you. So that's something to think about. And then another thing I'd say is just to obviously get the checklist of things that you need for the puppy. Obviously, one good thing to do is to get a crate. So a crate is generally a good idea for your dog to have a space for themselves. So don't think of it like a cage that you're locking them in. It's their bedroom. It's important for them to have some space and somewhere that they can go and sort of hide away and have some alone time. And obviously it's practical as well. So yeah, definitely think about crate training them when you get them.
Great. Should owners be worried if their puppy isn't eating when it first comes home?
This is quite a common thing that we see with puppies coming into the vets, like often for their first check. It's quite common that obviously they've had a lot of stress. It's quite an overwhelming time, them coming away from their mum and coming into this brand new environment. They've only ever known one place. So yes, it's not unexpected that they might not be eating very well. So it can just be because of stress. If you have changed their food, then that can be a reason. So ideally stick with the food that the breeder's been feeding them, at least for a week or so, just not to change too much at once. Obviously, if they're not eating very well, but they're showing signs that they're unwell, if they're vomiting or they've got diarrhea or there's anything that doesn't seem right, and then that may well be abnormal. So make sure you speak to your vet if you're not sure.
And is it safe for a puppy to go into the garden to toilet when they come home?
Yeah, so generally considered low risk. So I would say yes, but just make sure obviously that the garden is safe. So just have a little scout around for anywhere that they're likely to fall down, or there's nothing kind of propped up that they can knock over that could fall on them. In terms of sort of vaccinations and risk of picking up things from the garden, if you don't have any other dogs, then the main risk would be from other animals coming into your garden, particularly foxes. So check your garden regularly for fox poo, just to help reduce that sort of risk and clean that up regularly. The other thing I guess I should say is that you could socialize the puppy with other dogs in your garden. So if you've got family or friends that have a dog, it's a good idea to that window of socialization. Part of that is going to be in that period when they don't have full protection from their vaccinations, but which people often worry about, but they're going to have had one vaccination, so they'll be developing some protection from that. And if they're just socializing with one or two, a small number of other dogs that are healthy and fully vaccinated, so check that they are fully vaccinated, and then yeah, that's considered low risk.
Great. And then it'd be great to talk a bit about vet checkups. So when should new puppy owners take their puppy for its first visit to the vet? I'm sorry, that's my doorbell. So if you answer that, I can answer that.
No worries. So generally we'd say to wait a few days, so maybe wait 2 or 3 days just to let the puppy settle into their new home. But definitely within the first week. I'd say that. So it's important to get them checked in the first week to pick up any congenital problems that they might have been born with. So things like heart murmurs. Yeah, definitely get them checked in that first week. And that means that you can bring up those problems. If there is any major health problem that is detected, then you can go straight back to the breeder to discuss that. And then, I guess another thing to talk about would be how often they should be visiting the vet. So it's really important that they're visiting the vet regularly when they're young. Firstly, to check that they're growing well, and also to make sure and to check that they're not developing any health issues, but also for their socialization. We want them to build a positive association with coming to the vets. So a lot of practices, or most practices, will recommend monthly weight checks, usually just with a nurse, for them to be given a bit of fuss and a positive experience. If every time they come into the vets they have an injection or they have a thermometer put up their bottom, then they're going to have a negative association with the vets, and they're more likely to be fearful And that can manifest as being aggressive. So we see a lot of dogs that are terrified of the vets and can become really, really aggressive. And we struggle in some cases to if they've not been muzzle trained, to get a muzzle on them. And so on occasion, there are dogs we just can't examine. And that's obviously a massive issue. If they're ill and we can't do anything with them without sedating them, that's stressful for everyone involved. So really worth putting in the time and effort there with the regular checks.
Yeah, I definitely learnt that lesson with mine. I changed vets and then took her to get spayed, and obviously that just completely, she associated the vets with that, and then it made it really different. She was very anxious every time we went after that. So I definitely agree with that one. The checkups are worth it, just to, as you say, build that trust and relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if they're a bit older, a lot of vets will be quite happy for you to come in just for like the receptionists or nurses to just give your dog a few treats, and so that they're not having anything done to them, they're not being examined or anything. They're definitely worth speaking to them if you're worried your dog's getting anxious.
That's a good idea. Just go make a fuss of them. How often should they visit their vet?
So we would normally say, so in that first week for their first check, and then for their follow-up vaccinations, they'll have the first one usually about 8 weeks or just before, and then the second vaccination between 2 and 4 weeks later, depends on the vaccine product, so slightly different. And some vets will recommend a 16-week vaccination as well for parvovirus, and particularly if there's a higher risk of it in your area. So that's something that your vet may discuss with you. And then monthly checks until they're 6 months, and just for weight checks and just to build that positive association with the vets. After that, they'll have their annual vaccinations once a year, and a lot of practices will do a 6-month check as well.
Great. And when someone brings a puppy or a dog in for a checkup, what are you looking at sort of health wise to try and identify and check on them?
So we're checking their weight. So we'll weigh them every time to make sure they're growing as they should. And then certainly the first time they come in, and they'll have a complete head to toe examination. So we're particularly checking for things like heart murmurs, hernias, any abnormalities with their teeth, checking they don't have a cleft palate. And with male dogs, we want to make sure that both of their testicles are descended, because it's not an uncommon thing that they don't both come down. And checking for signs of common parasites like ear mites and fleas. That would be the most common parasites we'd find.
Great. And then on vaccinations, so what do vaccines protect dogs from? Because I think people are probably aware for themselves and kids, but perhaps not what the vaccines for dogs actually protect from.
So the core vaccines are for 4 different infections. 3 of them are infections they can pick up from other dogs. One is called distemper, hepatitis, and then the most common one that people will have heard of, or most likely to have heard of, is parvovirus, which can be fatal, and is something we do see, unfortunately, not infrequently, but it's very much preventable with vaccinations. That's why it's so important. And then that 4th infection is called leptospirosis, and that's a very serious infection that is zoonotic, so humans can pick it up as well. It's spread primarily from rats and mice, so through rodents and via their urine. So stagnant water or any kind of water courses would be a risk factor for your dog picking that up.
Great. And then how often should they have their boosters?
Once a year. So that they'll have all parts of the vaccine in their puppy course and when they're a year old. After that, it's just the leptospirosis, and it needs to be vaccinated for every year, because the immunity is more short-lived than with the other infections. So once a year for leptospirosis, and then those other 3 infections, generally most practices will just vaccinate dogs for them every 3 years after that.
Great. And are there any possible side effects from vaccines that they should be aware of and monitoring with their puppy?
So always a risk of side effects with any kind of treatment, medication, and vaccinations are no different. But they're generally uncommon, and they're usually mild side effects. The same as if you go and have a flu vaccine, you might expect to feel a bit achy or have a mild fever afterwards and just feel a bit under the weather. So the same can happen with puppies or dogs when they have a vaccination. But I would say it's not that common that people will come back to us and say they're worried about their dogs. So 9 times out of 10, you won't see any difference in them. And it's all normal because vaccines stimulate the immune system. So it's normal to see, expected to see some kind of response to that. Another thing that we will not uncommonly see will just be a small lump developing where the vaccination is given between the shoulder blades or the back of the neck. So if you notice that, you can flag it to your vet, but usually not a concern, and that would usually disappear within a few weeks. I would say there's quite a lot of misinformation particularly about the leptospirosis vaccine, as there's 2 types of the lepto vaccine. There's an L2 and an L4, and a lot of misinformation online that the L4 vaccination can be very harmful, but there's not a significant difference in reactions between the L2 and the L4. So for every 10,000 vaccinations, about 7 reactions for L4 versus 2 for L2. So out of 10,000 vaccinations, that's really very infrequent, and that L4 will give extra protection for 2 extra types of leptospirosis. So it's really not a concern. I've never seen any serious reaction to L4. I've used it every day for my working life for 8 years.
Cool. And then neutering and spaying. So can a female dog be neutered straight after her season?
Not straight after. So they can either be neutered before they have their first season. So that would be about 6 months of age. It depends on your dog's breed. So that's not always recommended in every case, particularly larger breed dogs. It's not always recommended. So talk to your vet about that. But generally, if we're doing it after the season, we have to wait usually about 3 months after the season, because if we do it too soon, there's a higher risk of bleeding. And also, after they have their season, dogs go through a lot of the same changes in their hormones as if they were pregnant, and it's quite common they can develop a false pregnancy. And that's usually in the 2 months after the season. So if we spay them and they're having a false pregnancy, then that can lead to problems where they produce milk persistently after they're spayed. And there's evidence that it's linked. It can increase the risk of some behavioural problems as well. So yeah, full season or 3 months after generally is the general advice.
And are there different procedures?
So for male dogs, not really. So there's just one way of castrating them. But with female dogs, there is the option of them having keyhole surgery, so a laparoscopic spay. So that generally has a smaller incision and a quicker recovery, but is usually more expensive. So it's something to talk to your vet about. Generally, so with any surgery, there's always some risk involved, but a spay is a surgery your vet will be doing very regularly. And whilst there are those risks, it's generally uncommon that there are any kind of complications. But yeah, worth talking about the keyhole surgery if that's something you want to think about for your dog.
Great. And then it would be good to chat a bit about the sort of basic nutrition for puppies. Does what a puppy or a dog eats have an impact on their overall health?
Yeah, of course. I mean, just the same as us, and they need to have the right balance of nutrients in their diet, and particularly when they're growing, it's important that they have the right amount of protein and vitamins and minerals. So particularly calcium, they're not having too much or too little, and getting enough energy as well. So if they're fed an inadequate diet, they'll be at risk of developing nutritional imbalances, and there's an increased risk of certain joint problems or problems with bone development if they're fed an inadequate diet. And that's something that we see more commonly where they're fed a home cooked diet that isn't properly balanced. So it is possible to feed a home cooked diet that is balanced, but really you need to be talking to a veterinary nutritionist if you're doing that. So generally we advise feeding a complete puppy food that's going to give them everything that they need, and you can be assured that they're not going to develop any nutritional deficiencies. Overfeeding also has consequences. Obviously, it's a bit more relevant for adult dogs rather than puppies, but according to studies, up to 65% of dogs in the UK are overweight, which is pretty terrifying statistic. And that obviously has a negative impact on their health, just in the same as with humans as well. So yeah, you can feed too little, you can feed too much, and yeah, obviously lots of impacts on their health.
And is it okay to give them human food?
It depends on what. So I'd say yes, but everything in moderation. And remember that if they're being fed a complete puppy food, then they'll be receiving the proper balance of nutrients and everything they need. So they don't need to be fed anything else. Be careful if you are feeding them human food to just look up and check that you're not feeding anything that might be toxic. So there are some things that we can eat that can be toxic to dogs or are toxic to dogs. So chocolate, garlic, onions, and be mindful of things that they can't digest properly. So one really common cause of intestinal obstructions is corn on the cobs, because they can't digest them properly and they just pass whole through their intestines, and they can be really nasty. So I'd say just don't take them straight to your outside bin. If you have some kind of food waste bin inside, I wouldn't even take the risk of leaving a corn cob in there for your dog to eat, because yeah, they can kill dogs, unfortunately. And then the other thing would be to just be mindful of, if you're feeding them any kind of scraps, don't try and avoid feeding things that are very fatty or rich. That's just likely to give them a tummy upset and sometimes more serious problems like pancreatitis in the case of really fatty foods. So just be sensible. Some dogs have much more sensitive tummies than others, so it depends a little bit on your dog.
And how often can you give them treats?
I mean, I think there's not like a hard and fast rule. I think just make sure that you're giving a treat as an actual reward for good behavior, or use them in training. I always tell off my parents-in-law for giving they've got a Labrador, Hattie, and they've got these baked not bones, but they're bone-shaped treats, and they're huge. It looks like a whole meal, and they just give her them willy-nilly. She is a bit overweight, unfortunately, as much as we try. And my wife's a vet as well, so we're always on at them to not give her so many treats. But so I'd say generally stick to small, like high value rewards, so tasty treats rather than just like big things like those bone things I was talking about.
Yeah.
You're going to fill them up, and they're after a while they get a bit boring. We at the vets, we have these dehydrated liver treats or chicken treats, and they tend to really like. So just make sure if you're giving a treat, it is a treat and it's not just given out willy-nilly.
Great. I think that my puppy knows the word treat, and saying it is now down here.
Oh, is he? Oh, no. We'll have to come up with a code word.
Yeah, exactly. Here for everyone, if everyone wants to see him.
Yeah. Oh.
He's learnt that word quite quickly. I think the way the others react when they're getting theirs.
Because he's massive, isn't he? You were telling me that he
is.
You weighed him again this week?
I haven't weighed him this week, no, but I don't think he's put on too much. He's definitely slowed down. So I think there is an element of he's just growing very fast for his age, and then hopefully will slow down. But it's definitely something I'm keeping an eye on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then what should a puppy owner do if their puppy has eaten something that is toxic to them, such as chocolate?
So the most important thing would be to contact your vet. If you're in any doubt, contact the vet straight away. And if we need to intervene, and that's usually not in every case, but you would usually be by making your dog sick, and there's a window in which we can do that. So in the first 1 to 2 hours, but really as soon as possible, for that to bring up whatever's in the stomach. So certainly beyond 2 hours, it's quite likely that whatever they've eaten will have passed out of their stomach, and we can't get them to bring it up. And they may also say, don't worry, but it's not a risk. So with things like chocolate you mentioned, it depends how much they've eaten based on their body weight. So a Great Dane eating a small amount of chocolate might not be a concern, but a Chihuahua eating the same amount of chocolate, that's they might only weigh 2 kilos versus the 60-70 kilo Great Dane, then that's going to be more of a risk to a Chihuahua. So it depends on your dog's size.
Okay, great. And then we've just got a quick time for some questions. We've had a few, but if anyone else has got any questions, please do ask them now. Lewis would like to know, how long should you keep dogs or puppies in a crate for?
I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm not quite sure what Lewis means, whether he means like at a time or like until what age. But a lot of people will keep their puppies. I think it's fine to keep your puppy in a crate overnight. Obviously, it depends on their kind of toilet training. If they're having accidents, you may need to get up in the night to let them out, particularly when they're small. They've got very small bladders and they need to pee quite frequently. But I'd say, generally kind of same advice, during the day as how long you would leave a dog alone for. So you wouldn't really want to leave a dog alone for more than 4 hours, I think is the general. Doing that regularly is a bit too long. So yeah, you wouldn't want to leave them in a crate for more than 4 hours either.
Great.
And then I guess in terms of their age, and then it depends really. I mean, if they're happy, if they like the crate, and like I was saying, a crate can act as their sort of bedroom, as a place that they voluntarily will just take themselves off in. So if they like the crate, there's no sort of upper age limit. I guess just bear in mind their size. So if they're like a massive dog in a tiny crate, then obviously that's not going to work. But like particularly a small dog, if they like a crate, then that's fine. Just keep the crate.
Great. And then Mark's got a very specific one here, but I'd be interested to know this too. Why is it that puppies and dogs love to rub themselves in fox poo when they spot it?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think there's a scientific evolutionary reason for that. I think they're just a bit gross, really. I don't know. I mean, obviously they, because it's another dog's scent, and there's not really a reason why they would like to, or an evolutionary reason that I can think of, that they would like to get that all over their coat and acquire that scent. So no, maybe I'll look that up and I can make a TikTok on it if I find some information about that.
Maybe it's they don't like smelling of nice shampoos and they'd rather just smell of the outdoors.
Yeah. I think that's probably it.
And then this is a cat question, but I guess it applies to dogs and cats. Can cats have cooked chicken that is seasoned?
I mean, be careful with what it's seasoned with. I would say no. Just feed them plain. If you want to feed them chicken, just feed them plain chicken. Some garlic can be toxic, so it's been seasoned with garlic. Garlic can be toxic in that it can cause damage to red blood cells, so it can affect. It can cause a sort of anemia if they eat a significant amount of garlic. So no garlic. Obviously, cautious with salt as well. So you can. They have a much lower salt requirement than us. Obviously, they're very small, but I'd say just generally best avoided, really.
Great. And then one more from Mark. I guess this is if you want to switch over the food that the breeders had them on, when is it safe to do that and switch their diet?
So I would say wait at least a week after bringing them home, just to make sure that they're not developing any tummy upsets. It's quite common they'll get diarrhea just in the first week, purely from stress, the stress of moving to a new environment. And if you change their food at the same time, then that's just going to make things worse. So wait for at least a week, let them settle in, check they're not developing any problems, and then you could start to transition them to another food. So do it very slowly. Again, changing food too quickly is a really common cause of diarrhea in puppies. So I would say to mix it in the new food with what they had from the breeder over the course of a week. So just gradually more and more each day. That gives time for their digestive enzymes to adapt, and they're less likely to develop problems, and also less likely to just turn their nose up at it if you just give them a completely new food that they've never seen before and expect them to eat the whole bowl. Then that's probably not going to happen. But if you introduce it slowly, then they're more likely to accept it.
Great, thank you. And that's all our questions. So thank you everyone for joining. I know there's been a lot of questions that are nutrition based. So we did have a class on Friday that's specifically about nutrition. So do check that out on Burns and Admiral's Facebook pages, and it's also on Burns's YouTube channel if you want to find out a bit more there. But thank you everyone for joining. Ben, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me on.
Lovely weekend, everyone. And we've got more classes next week, so please do check them out on the Burns and Admiral websites. Bye.
Bye.